Someone who can't follow simple protocols might find security escorting her out before the day ends. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 47 minutes before the Pentagon called St. Michael's Hospital in Atlanta asking why a Master Chief Petty Officer was working under an assumed identity without authorization. Ashley Cooper clocked in at 10:22 p.m., her badge clipping to the pocket of her scrubs with the small metallic sound of a life folding into itself. 3 years she had worked the night shift at St. Michael's, invisible by design, her movements efficient and quiet through fluorescent corridors that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax and the particular exhaustion that only hospitals exhale after dark. The scars on her left forearm, pale lines against tan skin, were barely visible in the harsh hallway lighting, and she kept them that way on purpose, pulling her sleeves down when younger nurses glanced too long at the marks. In her scrub pocket, her thumb found the tarnished challenge coin, the surface worn smooth from 3 years of the same gesture during quiet moments when her hands needed something to hold besides a patient's wrist or the plastic of an IV bag. She had carried him for miles through Helmand Province with a collapsed lung that wasn't hers. She had wrapped pressure dressings around shrapnel wounds while rounds whistled overhead. She had dragged him through a creek bed while his hearing aids filled with mud and sand and blood. And then the Pentagon had erased the whole thing, erased her rank, her service record, her call sign phantom, locked it all behind classified doors marked never existed. She had come to St. Michael's with a fake social security number, a Master Chief Petty Officer's muscle memory, and instructions never to acknowledge what she had been. The ER was alive tonight. Ambulances brought in a drunk driver at 11:03 p.m., a woman with chest pain at 11:22, a child with asthma at 11:44. Ashley moved through it all with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had once cleared rooms with a rifle, now clearing trauma bays with saline bags and cardiac monitors. Her hand steady as a surgical laser. Her jaw locked against the weight of 12 years she had buried. The deaf retired Navy SEAL arrived at 11:52 p.m. with a fever of 104.3 degrees and a mystery infection that spread through his blood like spilled ink through water. He was admitted to Trauma Bay 3 with labs still pending, and within 6 hours, 15 doctors had reviewed his chart and walked away. 15. The number felt deliberate, like a statement. Dr. Marcus Chen refused him first, liability concerns about treating a deaf patient without proper communication protocols. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo refused second, citing the complexity of the case and insufficient specialized equipment. Dr. James Brennan third. Dr. Lisa Park fourth. The refusals stacked like rejection slips, each doctor more polished than the last, each explanation more reasonable, each one true enough that Ashley understood the game being played. Hospital lawyers. Risk management committees. Board meetings. The patient was unmarketable, deaf, infectious, expensive, complicated. 15 doctors over 6 hours, each one finding their reason to step away. Dr. Whitfield arrived at 6:04 a.m. during morning rounds, his silver hair catching the overhead lights like it had been polished with machine oil, his suit tailored to the point of weaponization. He carried authority the way some men carry cologne, it filled the space before he did. He reviewed the chart for 40 seconds, lifted his eyes to the patient in Trauma Bay 3, and said nothing at all. His silence was louder than any refusal. He signed the order to transfer the patient to palliative consult by noon. Ashley had been checking the patient's vitals when she saw it, his forearm, the left one, the tattoo visible above the edge of his hospital gown. Her own name. Military stencil font. Cooper. Above it, a trident, the SEAL team insignia rendered in black ink that had faded to the color of old denim. She had no idea that the night shift nurse adjusting his cardiac monitor was the operator whose face he had never seen beneath night vision goggles and the particular shade of dust that had colored everything in Helmand Province for 18 months of her life. Her hands didn't shake. The trembling that came was not fear. It was restraint. She finished his vitals, heart rate 118, BP 142/89, O2 sat 93 on room air, and documented them in the system with the same precise keystroke she used every night. The patient signed something to the hospital interpreter who sat beside his bed, his hands moving in fluid ASL, his eyes asking questions no one had answered. Ashley understood maybe half of it, Her ASL was practical, learned in Kandahar province, military grade and limited. But she caught the word for fear. And the word for abandoned. The interpreter translated, "Will anyone help me?" The answer, as of 6:04 a.m., was no. Ashley worked through the morning shift change at 7:13 a.m., stayed past her clock-out time, moved through the hospital like a ghost in scrubs. She saw the chart notes as they appeared in the system. Palliative consult ordered. Pain management ordered. Comfort care ordered. By 8:53 a.m., the patient had been transitioned to a private room on the 3rd floor, not because he needed privacy, but because the ER wanted him gone, wanted the complexity removed, wanted the bed back for patients whose cases came with clear trajectories and reasonable outcomes. Dr. Whitfield found her at the vending machine on the 2nd floor at 9:17 a.m. He had a way of appearing in moments like that, materializing beside you with the confidence of a man who owned the space you were standing in. He pressed money into the machine for a bottle of water, Fiji, imported, expensive. The bottle hummed down the chute. "You're very dedicated," he said. His voice carried the particular texture of a man accustomed to being listened to. "Working overtime. Unusual for someone at your level." Ashley punched the button for black coffee. It came down harder than the water. "Patient needs attention." "The seal." He said it with the kind of certainty that suggested he already knew the answer. "You shouldn't involve yourself with that case, Ms. Cooper. I'm going to be direct about that. 15 doctors have assessed this patient." 15. That number should mean something to you. When that many experienced physicians step away from a case, it's not because they're incompetent. It's because the case is incompatible with standards of care we maintain here. With liability. With our ability to protect both the patient and the hospital. He turned to face her fully then, and she felt the weight of his attention the way a soldier feels the weight of a scope aimed at her position. "Someone who can't follow simple protocols," he continued, "someone who decides they know better than 15 physicians and the leadership of this institution, might find that security escorts her out of the building before the day ends. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Ashley lifted the coffee cup. It was still dripping. She had 3 years of practice at this moment, at keeping her face neutral, at the particular kind of submission that looked like compliance but was actually survival. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to show she heard him, short enough to avoid disrespect, and turned away. "I understand, doctor," she said. She heard him leave, heard his shoes on the tile floor moving with the authority of a man who had gotten what he came for. The vending machine hummed behind her. The coffee cooled in her hands. Through the window at the end of the hallway, Atlanta spread out beneath a gray morning sky, indifferent to the small moments that divide lives into before and after. In one of the rooms above her head, a deaf Navy SEAL slept in a hospital bed, his tattoo bearing her name, unaware that the woman who had saved his life once was about to decide whether to save it again. The hospital was quiet in that hour. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in amber. No one moved in the corridors. No monitors beeped. No alarms sang their mechanical songs. But that quiet wouldn't last. The amphitheater-style conference room at St. Michael's held 20 physicians in ascending rows, their seats climbing like a Roman Colosseum designed for ritual and spectacle. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Dr. Whitfield stood at the podium, his tailored suit catching the light like armor, and he smiled, the kind of smile that had closed 1,000 conversations in his favor. "Grand rounds," he announced, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of a man accustomed to obedience. "Let's discuss clinical protocols and the consequences of deviation." He gestured toward the overhead projector. The image appeared on the screen behind him, magnified to 6 feet wide, Ashley's handwritten patient advocacy notes, her signature bold at the bottom. The room went still. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song above them. 15 board-certified physicians, Whitfield said, circling her name with a laser pointer, the red dot trembling slightly as he gestured. 15. Each one examined this patient. Each one made a clinical determination based on liability, communication barriers, and medical complexity. And yet, he paused, letting the silence stretch. Nurse Cooper here decided they were all wrong. Ashley stood below the tiered seating, arms at her sides, jaw muscles locked so tightly she could taste copper. The 20 physicians took notes in synchronized whispers, the sound like wind through dry grass. She did not move. She did not blink. Perhaps she missed the lecture on chain of command in nursing school, Whitfield continued, his tone honeyed poison. Perhaps she believes that emotional attachment supersedes clinical judgment. Perhaps she thinks the hospital exists to fulfill her personal sense of heroism rather than to follow established protocol. He turned to face her directly, the laser pointer now aimed at her sternum like a weapon. Our little savior complex case study. How would you explain your unauthorized patient advocacy, Nurse Cooper? The silence was absolute. 20 pens stopped mid-note. The heart monitor down the hall beeped its steady rhythm, the only sound that dared move through the room. No, sir, Ashley said. Nothing more. Her voice emerged flat and level, the kind of calm that comes from having already survived worse than this. No explanation? Whitfield's eyebrows rose with theatrical precision. How professional. He clicked to the next slide, Hospital Protocol 47B, the chain of command flowchart. When a physician makes a determination, he said, it is not the nurse's role to second guess. It is the nurse's role to comply. To document. To escalate through proper channels. Not to become a crusader. He looked back at the 20 physicians. This is what happens when we fail to maintain institutional boundaries. This is what unauthorized advocacy looks like. And this, he gestured once more at her image on the screen, is what insubordination costs. Ashley's hands were clasped behind her back. Whitfield could not see them, but the muscles in her forearms had tightened into steel cord. Her shoulders remained square. Her face showed nothing, not disdain, not anger, not fear. The expressionless composure of someone who had been trained in rooms far more lethal than this one. The session lasted another 27 minutes. She stood through all of it while he turned her into a teaching example, her handwriting magnified across the screen like a criminal's confession. The physicians took notes. One of them, a cardiothoracic surgeon named Dr. Hayes, studied her with something approaching curiosity, as if he was trying to understand what kind of nurse would knowingly defy an entire hierarchy of authority. When Whitfield finally dismissed them, he said, Nurse Cooper, you may go back to your regular duties. And remember, some patients are not our responsibility. Ashley turned and walked out with the same steady pace she had entered with. Her shoes made no sound on the polished floor. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence she left. An hour later, she was standing at the vending machines on the 3rd floor, her hand feeding quarters into the slot with mechanical precision. The machine hummed and clicked. She retrieved a bottle of water, not because she was thirsty, but because the vending machine was in the corner, away from the nursing station, away from the cameras in the hallway. Dr. Whitfield appeared beside her, his coffee cup already half empty, his cologne filling the narrow space between them like an invasion. For nurses sat at the nearby station, and she absolutely knew, that he had timed this moment deliberately. You know, Cooper, he said, loud enough for all 4 of them to hear, I've seen this before. Nurses who think they know better than doctors. He paused, examining his coffee with exaggerated contemplation. It usually ends with security walking them out at the end of a shift. Sometimes sooner. Ashley opened her water bottle and took a single sip. The water was cold. It tasted like chlorine and the weight of institutional power. I'd say someone in your position should be very careful about the next few hours, Whitfield continued, still speaking for the benefit of the nurses at the station. Very careful indeed. Some people have short careers here. Some have no careers at all. She met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. The kind of eye contact that carried no fear, no deference, no hope of negotiation. Just acknowledgement. Just a precise measurement of the distance between them and a clear understanding of which one of them had already crossed the line into territory from which there was no return. Then she walked away. The challenge coin in her scrub pocket felt heavier than it had that morning. That afternoon, Whitfield appeared at the nurse's station during shift change, his voice cutting through the charting and conversation like a blade. Ashley was at the computer, her fingers moving across the keyboard with steady rhythm, documenting vital signs and medication administration. "Attention, all staff," he announced. "I want it noted that Nurse Cooper has been explicitly ordered to stay away from the patient in 3 West. Explicitly. Anyone who witnesses her near that room should report it immediately to myself or hospital administration. This is a direct order. Documentation and compliance are mandatory." The station went quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sound like electricity waiting for something to ignite. Ashley continued typing. Her fingers did not hesitate. Her breath did not change. The coffee she had poured an hour ago sat untouched beside her keyboard, growing cold with each passing minute, a small monument to her refusal to acknowledge the threat. When Whitfield finally left, moving toward the elevator with the satisfied gait of a man who had just fortified his position, Ashley's hand moved to her pocket. The challenge coin was still there, worn smooth from decades of being held by fingers that had gripped far worse things. She wrapped her hand around it, feeling the weight of engraved metal, the slight irregularity of its surface where shrapnel had been welded into the design alongside aircraft wreckage. Her knuckles went white. Then she released it. The evening continued as all evenings did at St. Michael's: medications, vital signs, charting, the endless routine of keeping people alive while standing at the bottom of a hierarchy that had just announced her irrelevance. She worked 3 West's patients 3 rooms down from the deaf seal who lay in isolation, whom she had been explicitly forbidden to approach, whom she had recognized from a tattoo on his forearm that bore her own name. At 2,200 hours, the monitor alarm came from that direction. She did not move immediately. She sat at the station for exactly 3 seconds, listening to the beep of the alarm, knowing what it meant, knowing what Whitfield had ordered, knowing what would happen if she crossed that line now. The alarm continued. 2 nurses from the evening shift glanced toward 3 West. One reached for the call button to notify the on-call physician. Ashley stood. The monitor's alarm split the hallway like a scream. 3 continuous tones. Then silence that was somehow worse. Ashley was moving before the sound stopped, muscle memory from Hellman taking control of her legs, her hands, her breath, already steady, already measured. The heart monitor showed the pattern she'd been waiting 72 hours not to see, the electrical activity that meant nothing. The pressure in the chest. The blood backing up into the wrong chambers. Room 3 West. The patient's eyes were open but distant, the way eyes look when the body is running out of air. His lips had lost their color. His oxygen saturation was dropping: 88, 84, 79. Each number a countdown. Ashley pressed the call button. Once. Firm. Decisive. "I need the on-call surgeon in 3 West. Stat." Her voice came out the way it had come out in Kandahar, flat, informational, the kind of voice that made people move without asking why. 15 minutes. That's what the surgeon would take to arrive from home. Maybe 12 if traffic cooperated. The patient had 90 seconds before his blood pressure dropped below the level where his brain stayed conscious. She was already calculating, already moving, 2 minutes before the organ started the cascade of failure. The body's final countdown once the heart stopped pumping effectively. The on-call surgeon's voice crackled back through the overhead speaker. "Not him, a resident. Dr. Chen is in surgery. Post-op. Can't leave the case. Not asking him to leave anything. I'm asking him to walk to his OR and perform an emergency procedure. 90 seconds window. Static. Then, Dr. Chen says the patient's already been under Dr. Whitfield's care and there's been protocol concerns. He's not comfortable with the intervention. Recommend transfer to ICU and continued observation. Observation. Watching a man die. Ashley's hands were already moving, gloves snapping on with a sound like gunshots in the quiet hallway, because 90 seconds wasn't enough time for protocol, for chain of command, for the careful dance of liability that had 15 doctors turning away from this patient over the past 3 days. 15. The number repeated in her mind like a drumbeat. 15 men and women in white coats had looked at his chart, at his infection, at the fact that he was deaf, couldn't communicate easily, might be litigious, complicated case, and they had all said no. One had said yes. She grabbed the emergency tray from the supply station. Betadine. Sterile field. The needle, 14 gauge, long enough to reach the pericardial sac through the intercostal space. Her hand knew this procedure the way muscle knows its own name. 15 months in Helmand Province had taught her hands things her brain had never consciously processed. The angle of approach. The depth. The resistance of tissue layers sliding past the needle tip. The hallway. Not the procedure room. The procedure room was locked, an elective cesarean going on inside, and there was no time to explain, no time to move him, no time for any of it. Just the hallway with its fluorescent ceiling panels and the linoleum that her boots felt solid against and the smell of antiseptic mixing with something underneath it, something copper and warm. "Hold him steady," she said to the CNA standing in the doorway, frozen in the way people freeze when watching someone break the sacred rules of institutional medicine. The patient understood. His hands gripped the stretcher rails. His eyes found hers, one brown, one milky from old trauma, and she saw the flicker of recognition. Not of who she was. Of what she was doing. She prepped the skin. Betadine in concentric circles. The cold of alcohol-based solution drying on his ribs. Her fingers found the third intercostal space, counting down from the clavicle, feeling for the landmarks that hadn't changed since she'd last done this with a man bleeding out in the dark. The needle went in at 45 degrees, angled upward toward the heart, and she advanced it slowly, slowly, feeling for the subtle change in resistance that meant she'd breached the pericardium. No room for hesitation. Hesitation was how people died. The needle advanced. And then, that moment of give, that microsecond where the pressure changed. She was in. The syringe. Already prepared. She drew back on the plunger and the barrel filled with fluid the color of rust, of blood mixed with serum, of everything that had been crushing his ventricles into submission. 150 milliliters. More than enough to kill a man if you gave it time. The patient gasped. It wasn't a dramatic, movie moment gasp. It was a man whose chest suddenly had room for his lungs again. His oxygen saturation climbed, 79, 82, 88. His blood pressure rose from 71/41 to 89/56. Not normal. But viable. The difference between life and the alternative. The monitor beeped its normal rhythm back into the hallway, a sinus rhythm, steady, the electrical poetry of a heart that remembered how to work. His color came back pink at the lips, pink in the cheeks, the slow return of blood to skin that had been turning gray. Ashley disposed of the needle in the sharps container and began charting the procedure before her hands could shake, before anyone could tell her to stop, before the institutional machinery could engage its gears and crush this moment into a regulatory violation. He reached for her hand. His fingers were warm. Alive. She was charting the fluid volume, 150 milliliters, blood-tinged, when Dr. Whitfield appeared in the hallway. He was still in his dinner coat, still had the sheen of an evening interrupted, and his eyes moved from the patient's steadying monitors to Ashley's gloved hands to the documentation she'd started. His face went white. Then red. "My office. Now." Not a request. The kind of command that people obeyed because the tone made disobedience feel impossible. Ashley finished the final note. Signed off on the procedure. Checked the patient's oxygen saturation one more time, 92 now, climbing, and then she walked. The hallway felt longer when she was walking it toward something that mattered. The walls seemed to breathe inward. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a frequency that made her teeth ache. Whitfield's office was on the 4th floor. Corner position. The kind of office that proved he'd won his internal battles. His hand shook as he closed the door, and she watched him register that she was watching him shake, that she could see his anger was not controlled at all but barely contained, a thing with teeth and claws scratching at the inside of his professional composure. "I gave you a direct order." His voice came out cold. Precise. More dangerous than yelling because it meant he was thinking, calculating, planning. "Stay away from that patient. You violated it. He would have died without the intervention, sir. That is not your decision to make." He picked up his phone. "Your medical license does not supersede Dr. Chen's judgment or mine. Your lack of understanding of that distinction will cost you your career." He made the first call before she'd taken a breath. To someone on the hospital board, someone with a name that meant money, power, the kind of connections that moved through Atlanta's medical infrastructure like a circulatory system. She heard the words, liability exposure, pattern of insubordination, credential concerns. Each phrase a small hammer blow. The second call went to Helen Pritchard, the hospital's external quality consultant. The third to someone at Ashley's nursing school. The fourth to a lawyer, though she didn't catch the lawyer's name, just heard him say, "Document everything." Then he hung up and looked at her with the kind of expression a man wears when he's already won. "You're suspended pending investigation. Helen Pritchard will be conducting a comprehensive review of your employment file, your credentials, your clinical decisions. Do not contact your colleagues. Do not attempt to access the hospital system. Do not enter this facility except to attend investigatory meetings. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." "You may leave my office." She left. Walked through hallways that suddenly felt hostile. Every face was a question mark, every set of eyes a judgment. The night shift staff who'd worked beside her for 3 years were staring. One nurse, Michelle, who'd covered breaks with her for months, quickly looked away. The waiting area outside HR was empty. She sat on a chair that was designed to be uncomfortable, made of plastic and chrome that wanted nothing to do with human warmth, and she watched the clock on the wall tick toward midnight. 15 minutes later, Whitfield emerged with Helen Pritchard. She was a severe woman dressed in a grey suit that had cost more than Ashley's entire apartment, and she carried a leather portfolio the way a surgeon carries a scalpel. "We're bringing in an external investigator," Pritchard announced. Her voice had the texture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Given the severity of the protocol violation and Dr. Whitfield's concerns about your credentials, we need a comprehensive review. You're suspended effective immediately. You'll be notified when your investigatory interview is scheduled." The portfolio didn't open. Ashley didn't need to see what was inside. She drove home in silence. The rain started somewhere around Atlantic Station, just a few drops at first, then harder, the kind of rain that made the windshield wipers fight to keep up. By the time she reached her apartment on Peachtree, it was hammering the car like applause for something nobody wanted. She sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes with the engine off. The next morning came with a phone call from her former nursing school director. The voice on the other end was apologetic but firm. There had been an inquiry from St. Michael's regarding credential irregularities in her file, and protocol required that her references be re-interviewed. Could she explain the discrepancies in her employment history between 2004 and 2007? Those were the years she couldn't claim. The years that existed only in Pentagon files marked classified. The years when she'd been someone else entirely, doing work that officially never happened. "There are no discrepancies," she said quietly. "I was on extended leave." "Extended medical leave?" "That should have been documented in your file." It was documented. Through channels that don't appear in civilian records. A pause. "Ms. Cooper, we need to be able to verify everything in your file. If there are gaps we can't explain. There are gaps that can't be explained. They're not going to change." Another pause. Longer this time. "We may need to put your credential status on provisional review pending clarification." She hung up after that. Not rudely. Just hung up. At noon the next day, security walked her out of the hospital. Not in handcuffs, nothing dramatic. Just two officers who escorted her to the parking lot while staff watched through the windows. They didn't touch her. They didn't need to. The uniforms were enough. The patient was still sleeping when she left. Still alive. Still breathing with a chest that had room for his lungs. That was the only thing that mattered. But what she didn't know, what nobody in the hospital knew yet, was that a man was lying 3 floors above her in a different bed, in a different room, and he had just woken up. He was a former Taliban commander turned refugee. He was adjusting to American hospitality and hospital food and the strange mercy of asylum. And when the night nurse came to take his vitals, he said something in Pashto that made her freeze. He said he knew her. He said her name, not her name, her code name, the name that had been whispered in caves and across radio frequencies and in the darker places that didn't officially exist. He said, Phantom. And somewhere in the Pentagon, in offices nobody was supposed to know about, alarms that had been quiet for 6 years began to ring. Dr. Whitfield didn't wait for sunrise. At 4:51 a.m., he was in his office on the 3rd floor, the hospital still dark except for the emergency department lights bleeding through the windows, and he began making calls. The phone felt warm in his hand, his voice measured and reasonable as he spoke to board members he'd known for 23 years. His brother-in-law was the hospital's legal counsel. His college roommate controlled 3 insurance contracts worth $4 million annually. Another board member's daughter had gotten her pediatrics residency through a letter Whitfield had written. Favors worked like compound interest, you collected them for years, then spent them all at once. We have a liability situation, he told each of them. A nurse providing unauthorized care to a complex patient. Potential credential issues. We need documentation of immediate termination before she becomes a legal exposure. He didn't mention that Ashley had saved the patient's life. He didn't mention the pericardiocentesis in the hallway. He mentioned only protocol violations and risk. He mentioned insubordination. He mentioned the Grand Rounds incident, framing it as evidence of a pattern. 3 board members said they would support immediate action. 2 said they needed to see documentation first. Whitfield assured them documentation was being prepared. By 6:15 a.m., he had already called Ashley's nursing school. He spoke to the director of the master's program, a woman he donated $50,000 to 3 years ago for a simulation lab. I need to verify credentials on one of your graduates, he said. Ashley Cooper, class of 2021. We're conducting a routine audit and some of her clinical hours aren't matching our records. Nothing serious, just administrative clarification. The director promised to pull her file and follow up. She was cooperative because Whitfield had always been cooperative with the school. Favors work both ways. By 7:44 a.m., the external hospital quality consultant had already been contacted. His name was Marcus Brennan, and he was the hospital's CEO, which meant he answered to the board. Whitfield had prepared a 1-page summary, unauthorized patient advocacy leading to protocol violations and patient safety concerns. Recommendation, immediate suspension pending investigation. Brennan had forwarded it to HR with a single instruction, have termination letter ready by noon. The letter was already drafted by 8:15 a.m. All it needed was a signature. All it needed was for Ashley to show up for her shift so they could walk her out while her chart was still warm. She didn't show up for her shift. She wasn't at the hospital at all. She was in the ER at 9:48 a.m., but not as staff. She was there because the on-call surgeon who refused the pericardiocentesis yesterday was being questioned by hospital administration about his refusal to come to a trauma emergency. The surgeon was nervous. He kept saying he wasn't qualified for that specific procedure. He kept saying he'd recommended the patient be transferred. He kept saying the on-call cardiologist should have handled it. None of this mattered. What mattered was that a patient who should have been dead by hour 50 was still alive, and someone had saved him, and Whitfield needed that person gone before anyone started asking questions about why 15 doctors had refused. At 10:45 a.m., the termination letter was sitting on Whitfield's desk, signed by Marcus Brennan, witnessed by hospital legal. It stated cause for immediate termination, violation of explicit verbal directive to cease patient contact. Unauthorized medical intervention outside scope of nursing practice. Pattern of insubordination as documented during Grand Rounds presentation. The letter did not mention that the unauthorized intervention had kept a man breathing. The letter did not mention that following protocol would have resulted in a code death. The letter only mentioned violations. Security arrived at her assigned station at 11:58 a.m. The guard was named Diaz, and he looked genuinely uncomfortable as he approached her. "Ms. Cooper, we need you to come with us." Ashley looked up from the charting station where she'd been documenting another patient's fluid intake. Her hands were steady. Her face showed nothing. She stood up and followed Diaz down the corridor, past the nurse's station, past the break room where 3 staff members pretended not to watch her walk by. Whitfield was waiting at the administrative exit with the HR director. He was wearing his white coat, his stethoscope draped over his shoulders like a symbol of authority. When he saw Ashley, he smiled, just slightly, a thin line that never touched his eyes. "I did warn you yesterday," he said. "I told you what would happen if you couldn't follow simple protocols. This is on you." Ashley looked at him for 3 seconds without blinking. When she spoke, her voice was flat as a radio frequency. "The patient's alive." Whitfield's smile tightened. "The patient is a medical liability, and you were explicitly ordered away from his case. That makes you insubordinate and unfit for continued employment." He gestured to Diaz. "Escort her to her locker. She has 10 minutes to collect her personal items." The locker room was empty. Ashley opened her locker, 3 years of accumulated shifts, a spare pair of compression socks, a granola bar she'd forgotten about in April. The tarnished challenge coin she'd kept since 2019 was in the side pocket, wrapped in a piece of cloth that had once been white. She picked it up and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, barely an ounce, but it felt heavier than it should. The coin showed the Navy insignia, eagle and trident, the anchor worn smooth in places from being handled 10,000 times over 6 years. It was the only piece of her real life she kept. The only thing that proved Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper had ever actually existed. She put the coin in her pocket. Diaz waited by the exit. The hospital smell, bleach and antiseptic and something underneath like fear, hung in the air as she walked out. It was noon exactly. The sun was bright. The parking lot was full. And somewhere in a hospital bed on the 4th floor, a deaf Navy SEAL slept without knowing who had carried him through the hallway when his heart was collapsing and every doctor in the building had decided he wasn't worth saving. 2 days later, Ashley sat in Marie's diner on the edge of Atlanta, the kind of place that served coffee at any hour and didn't ask questions. It was 3:17 a.m. The diner was empty except for her and the waitress, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes who'd seen everything and judged nothing. The coffee in front of Ashley had gone cold, a skin forming on the surface where heat no longer moved. The windows were dark except for the streetlight across the street, and in the glass Ashley could see her own reflection, hollow-eyed, unfamiliar, like looking at a stranger who wore her face. She turned the tarnished challenge coin over in her fingers. Anchor to trident. Trident to anchor. Again. Again. The metal was cool and smooth in her hand, worn in some places from 6 years of handling, sharp in others where the edges had never been touched. This coin was given to SEALs who completed their initial training, proof that you'd made it through Hell Week, that you'd earned the right to call yourself a SEAL. She'd earned it in 2017. She'd earned everything else after that, Navy Cross, Silver Star, the scars that mapped her body like a geography of survival. The waitress approached with a coffee pot. "Refill?" Ashley shook her head. The waitress left. Outside, the night was so quiet you could hear the rain starting, just barely, a whisper against the parking lot asphalt. She'd been invisible for 3 years. That was the deal when they gave her the new identity after the operation that never happened, the 12-day combat tour that officially didn't exist. Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper died in a training accident. Her records were sealed. She was erased so completely that even the hospital she worked at didn't know she'd ever been anything except a night shift nurse with steady hands and no past. Then a man with her name tattooed on his arm walked into her ER, and everything started breaking apart. Her phone rang at 3:17 a.m. The number showed Washington, D.C. area code. When she answered, a woman's voice came through, a military crisp, the kind of voice that had given orders in theaters of Operation Ashley would never be allowed to discuss. "Is this Master Chief Petty Officer Cooper?" Ashley's breath caught. Her hand went tight on the challenge coin. "I was told never to use that name. We need you to explain why you're working under an assumed identity without current authorization." The woman's voice was professional, but there was an edge underneath, concern, maybe, or anger. "Your erasure order was rescinded 6 months ago. You should have received certified notification by January." "I received nothing." Ashley sat up straight in the booth. Her coffee was still cold. The diner still hummed. But everything had changed. "Who is this?" "Pentagon Operations Command. We have a containment situation." The woman paused. A former Taliban commander was just admitted to St. Michael's as a refugee patient. Medical clearance through the Immigration Service. He was on the treatment ward this morning and he recognized you immediately. He spoke your code name, Phantom, to hospital staff. The coin slipped from Ashley's fingers and hit the tabletop. It spun, anchor to trident, before settling on the scarred formica. The waitress looked over from the counter, but Ashley was already standing up. "A general is being dispatched to Atlanta," the woman continued. "You need to return to St. Michael's immediately. This needs to be controlled before it escalates." The room fractured when the voice came from bed 7. A former Taliban commander admitted as a refugee under federal protection, his scarred face barely recognizable beneath the oxygen mask, lifted his hand and pointed directly at Ashley Cooper standing near the door with her hands in her pockets. "Phantom," he said. His English was accented but clear. "You are Phantom." The monitors beeped their mechanical rhythm. Nobody moved. Dr. Whitfield stood at the foot of the bed where the Deaf Seal patient slept, and beside him, the hospital administrator Margaret Chen had gone very still, her jaw locked the way people's jaws lock when the ground shifts beneath them. "That's impossible," Whitfield said. His voice came out thin. "She's a nurse. She works night shift. I know who she is," the former commander interrupted. His English carried the weight of someone who'd spent 3 years in interrogation rooms. "I know her from 2009. From the Helmand province. From the operation where she carried 17 men out of the valley. 3 were my brothers. I fought against her. I remember the call sign whispered in radios. Phantom. No face, no name, only hands that moved like instruments of death in the darkness." Ashley didn't move. She didn't reach for the call button or deny it or confirm it. She stood there the way she always stood, balanced on the balls of her feet, weight distributed, ready. Whitfield's face went the color of old paper. "Security. Someone get security. This patient is confused, he's on morphine, he's clearly hallucinating." "He's not," a new voice said. The doors opened at 6:06 a.m. 2 officers in dress uniforms entered first, their dress blues crisp enough to cut glass, their presence making the air pressure in the room change like a weather system moving in. Behind them came a 2-star general with silver hair and eyes that had seen places most people's nightmares couldn't reach. Her name placard read Vance. Behind her walked a man in a dark suit with the particular stillness of federal law enforcement, FBI, the kind that wore badges on chains and carried warrants folded in jacket pockets. General Vance opened a folder. The fluorescent lights above them hummed their electric song. "I have here the classified military record of Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Marie Cooper, United States Navy SEAL Team 3, Charlie Platoon. Retired, March 2014. She looked directly at Ashley. "I'm reading this aloud because there are people in this room who need to understand exactly what they're standing next to." Whitfield's mouth opened. No sound came out. The general continued. Bronze Star for Valor, first citation. October 2008, Kandahar Province. She paused. A breath. A beat. Silver Star for Valor, first citation. February 2009, Helmand Province. Another pause, longer this time. Silver Star for Valor, second citation. March 2009, Helmand Province. The silence stretched like a rope being pulled taut. 2 Purple Hearts. Combat wounds, both sustained during the same operation in which Petty Officer Cooper personally evacuated 17 military personnel over a distance of 6 kilometers through active fire, including an evacuation of a fellow SEAL with a collapsed lung, that being the patient currently sleeping in this bed. She turned a page. Navy Cross. Distinguished for extraordinary heroism. The operation preserved the lives of 17 United States military personnel and prevented the compromise of intelligence assets that would have cost approximately 400 additional lives in the following operational cycles. That's her record, Dr. Whitfield. That's what you're looking at. Whitfield backed up until his spine hit the wall. I didn't know. There was no way I could have known. You did know, the general said quietly. Her voice carried the kind of authority that didn't need volume. 6 months ago, the Pentagon rescinded the erasure order on Petty Officer Cooper's service record. The reinstatement letter was sent via certified mail to the Facility Security Coordinator at St. Michael's Hospital, Atlanta, Georgia. That's you, Dr. Whitfield. You signed for it. We have the delivery confirmation. The FBI agent, Torres, his nameplate read, stepped forward. His presence had the weight of institutional consequence. That letter is not in any hospital file system. It's not in records. It's not on Petty Officer Cooper's personnel jacket. You intercepted it. I didn't, Whitfield's voice cracked. His hands were shaking now, no longer hidden. That letter could have been a legal liability. I thought it was a notification of possible claims. I was protecting the hospital. You were protecting yourself, CEO Brennan said from the corner. She'd been standing there the whole time, listening. Because you knew that if she was actually military, if she was actually cleared, then everything you'd done to her in the last 72 hours was a federal crime. The deaf SEAL patient in the bed stirred. His eyes opened. His hand found the call button that had a text-to-speech function. The hospital had accommodations, at least those much, and he oriented his face toward the group gathered around him. He saw Ashley. His eyes went soft. He lifted his shirt. The scars were architecture. Shrapnel had written a story across his chest and abdomen, a map of survival and reconstruction. He made a gesture with his hands, signing in ASL with the precision of someone who'd learned fluency before trauma took his hearing. The translator, a young woman who'd been standing quietly near the corner, spoke his words. She carried me 6 kilometers with a collapsed lung. Not me. Hers, not mine. I woke up in a field hospital and she was gone. They told me it was a helicopter. They told me it was an angel. I didn't believe them. Now I see her face and I understand. She is real. She saved my life, and I didn't even know her name until this moment. The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilator wheeze, the rhythmic pulse of the machine breathing for possibility. Torres opened his laptop. The screen cast its glow across the boardroom they'd moved to, still pale yellow walls, still fluorescent lights, still the smell of industrial carpet cleaner and institutional despair. He turned the monitor so everyone could see. During our security review of St. Michael's network systems, we recovered deleted files from Dr. Whitfield's work computer. The agent's voice was calm, the way a surgeon's voice is calm while they explain the extent of the damage. Incident reports. 14 of them, all filed against Nurse Cooper. The first report appeared on screen. Torres read aloud. Patient in room 502 complained about Nurse Cooper's attitude on March 14 at 2:14 p.m. Dr. Whitfield filed this report on March 13 at 11:37 p.m. That's 17 hours before the complaint allegedly occurred. Whitfield stood up. His voice came out as a whisper that somehow carried across the room like a shout. I don't remember, the timestamps could be wrong, my computer was hacked. Torres didn't pause. He didn't acknowledge the denial. He opened another file, then another. March 16th report describing a medication error. Created on Whitfield's computer March 12th at 3:02 p.m. For days before the incident. Another file opened. March 19th report. Created March 15th, March 22nd report. Created March 18th. Every single one. Every report documenting false complaints against Nurse Cooper was fabricated in the 72 hours after Dr. Whitfield learned that a Master Chief Petty Officer had advocated for a SEAL patient against his direct orders. This is slander, Whitfield said. His hands were trembling now, not from fear but from something worse, from the moment when everything you'd built started collapsing in real time. This is a persecution. I am the chief of medicine at this institution. You were, CEO Brennan corrected. As of 6:30 this morning, your employment is terminated. Effective immediately. General Vance closed her folder. You intercepted federal mail. You fabricated evidence. You attempted to discharge a service member based on false documentation, creating a deliberately hostile work environment that resulted in her termination and loss of livelihood. That's fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to violate her civil rights. The JG officer, Judge Advocate General, military legal authority, stepped forward with a document that moved like bad news traveling. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, I'm placing you under federal arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of federal records, and obstruction of a federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent. The handcuffs clicked on like a period at the end of a sentence. The sound echoed through the boardroom, through 9 years of boardroom authority built on leverage and political favors, all of it evaporating in the space of 45 seconds. The two officers walked him out, his protests dissolving into whispers that nobody heard anymore. Torres put his laptop away. The screen went dark. General Vance nodded at Ashley, a small gesture of recognition that carried the weight of an entire military structure acknowledging one of its own. Welcome home, Master Chief, she said. 18 months later, Ashley Cooper's office door opened onto the 3rd floor of the Atlanta VA Medical Center. Her nameplate read, Chief Nursing Officer, Atlanta VA. The placard was polished stainless steel with her rank embossed underneath. Master Chief Petty Officer. No hiding anymore. No invisibility by design. The Deaf SEAL patient, retired Commander James Halwick, worked 2 floors down in the Veterans Services Division. He'd asked for a position teaching ASL to medical staff. The hospital approved it. Now, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, he held class in the training room, his hands moving with the precise poetry of sign language, teaching nurses and doctors and administrative staff that communication wasn't about sound, it was about intention. Ashley saw him in the cafeteria on Thursdays. They had coffee. He still didn't remember her face from Helmand Province, the dust and night vision goggles and adrenaline made identification impossible, but he remembered her hands. He remembered the way they moved when she'd checked his vital signs in the ER, the same fluid precision he'd felt carrying him through fire 9 years ago. That was enough. Memory works differently for survivors. Dr. Whitfield sat at a folding table outside a Kroger grocery store 3 miles away, on the other side of Atlanta where the neighborhoods changed and the people moved through different economic orbits. His table had a banner reading Medigap Supplemental Insurance, call for a quote. His hands shook as he held out brochures to people who walked past without making eye contact. He was 53. He looked 70. Federal prison had stripped something from him that couldn't be replaced, not his health, though that had deteriorated too, but his certainty. The medical board had stripped his license. The hospital had stripped his name from the directory. The news networks had played the perp walk footage 3 times daily for a week, his career dissolving in pixelated frames watched by thousands. His wife left during the trial. His daughter wouldn't return calls. His colleagues, the ones who'd owed him favors for years, suddenly had no memory of his name. On a Saturday morning in May, Ashley went to that same Kroger for groceries. She wasn't looking for him. The universe just arranged it that way. He was sitting at the table. His eyes lifted when he heard her approach, a reflex toward any sound that might indicate a customer. When he saw her face, the Navy uniform crisp, the Master Chief insignia gleaming on her collar like a bar of gold, his hands froze on the brochures. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. He looked away first, his hands beginning to tremble harder as he pretended to reorganize literature that didn't need reorganizing. Ashley kept walking. She had places to be. A keynote speech at the Georgia Nursing Association conference 3 days later, where she would stand at a podium in front of 400 nurses and talk about advocacy, about courage, about the invisible work that saves lives without ever needing recognition. She would end with a single line that got written into the program afterward, that people quoted back to her at grocery stores and restaurants for years afterward: the ones who have seen the worst often give the most. The tarnished challenge coin sat on her desk now, no longer hidden. Beside it, a photograph, 17 SEALs standing in combat formation, one of them holding a sign that read "Phantom saved us all." The photo was classified once. Now it was unframed and displayed, a casual reminder that some ghosts were real. She didn't hide anymore. She didn't have to. If you've made it this far, you're the kind of person who understands that heroism isn't always visible. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, have you ever misjudged someone only to discover they were something far greater than you imagined?